The woman he once left behind was now the woman he had to ask for a job. The thought had not yet crossed Ethan Caldwell's mind. Not yet. For now, he was simply sitting beneath the cold white lights of the 32nd floor, holding a black leather folder against his knees as though it could keep his hands from shaking. Around him, everything looked expensive. Glass walls. Pale stone floors. Silent elevators opening and closing with soft mechanical whispers. A receptionist spoke quietly into a headset while an assistant hurried past carrying a tablet. On the wall opposite him, brushed gold letters spelled the name he had seen only that morning, Brooks Strategic Group. Ethan looked at them again. He swallowed. He had no idea who the founder was. He only knew the company was hiring, and after 6 months of rejection, he could no longer afford to be proud. His suit was clean, carefully pressed, but the cuffs had begun to fade. He rubbed his thumb across one sleeve and glanced toward the closed glass door at the end of the corridor. Behind it was the CEO's office. The interview was supposed to begin in 12 minutes. A woman in a navy blazer walked past him, slowed for half a second, and looked at his resume. Mr. Caldwell. Ethan looked up. Yes. You're here for the senior operations manager position? Yes. She offered a polite smile. Someone will come for you shortly. Then she disappeared behind another door. Ethan leaned back. For a moment, the building became strangely quiet. He could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning and the distant rhythm of keyboards from somewhere beyond the hallway. He closed his eyes. And without warning, a memory returned. A small apartment 5 years earlier. Rain tapping against the kitchen window. 2 half-empty boxes near the door. Ariana Brooks standing barefoot on the cold floor, staring at him as he held a suitcase. She had looked tired that night. Not angry. Just tired. Ethan, she had whispered, are you really leaving? He remembered how difficult it had been to look into her eyes. How easy it had been to look at the door. Back then, Ariana had lost almost everything. Her job. Her savings. The future they had planned together. And Ethan had convinced himself that leaving was simply protecting his own future. He had said the sentence he regretted only after it was too late. I can't build a life with someone who has already lost hers. The memory disappeared as quickly as it came. Ethan opened his eyes. The hallway was still there. The polished floor. The silent elevator. The gold letters. He looked down at his hands. They were trembling now. He tightened them together. Then the elevator doors at the far end opened. A young employee stepped out carrying a folder. She glanced toward Ethan, then toward the CEO's office. Mr. Caldwell. He stood immediately. Yes. She gave him a professional smile. She's ready for you. Ethan nodded. He picked up his folder and followed her down the corridor. Every step seemed louder than the one before. He passed framed photographs of the company's milestones, awards, new buildings, major acquisitions. At the final photograph, he stopped for less than a second. A woman stood in the center of a crowded boardroom, surrounded by executives. Her back was turned slightly toward the camera. Her posture was calm. Familiar. Ethan frowned. Something about the silhouette pulled at a memory he could not quite reach. The assistant opened the door. Ms. Brooks, your 11 o'clock is here. Ethan stepped inside. Then he saw her. Ariana slowly lifted her eyes from the document on her desk. 5 years disappeared between one breath and the next. She did not move. Neither did he. And for the first time that morning, Ethan understood exactly whose company he had come to work for. 5 years earlier, Ariana Brooks had still believed that losing everything was something a person could survive if the right person stayed beside her. She had been wrong. The first thing to disappear was her job. The company had collapsed almost overnight, leaving behind unpaid invoices, unanswered emails, and a final paycheck that never arrived. Ariana remembered sitting at her kitchen table that morning, staring at the same number on her bank account until the digits seemed to blur. Outside the window, rain slid slowly down the glass. Her coffee had gone cold. Her phone kept vibrating with messages from creditors, landlords, and people who suddenly needed answers she did not have. She turned the phone face down. Then she heard Ethan's key in the lock. For a moment, relief came before fear. She had spent the entire day waiting for him. Ethan walked into the apartment carrying a paper bag from a restaurant. He placed it on the counter without saying much. "I thought we could have dinner," he said. Ariana looked at him. "I lost my job today." His hand stopped on the counter. It was only for a second, but she noticed. "I'm sorry," he said. She waited for something more. A question. A promise. Maybe just a hug. Nothing came. That night, they ate in silence. The television played softly in the background while Ariana moved food around her plate. Ethan kept checking his phone. She noticed the expensive watch on his wrist, the same watch she had helped him choose 2 years earlier when things were good. Back then, they had talked about buying a house. Traveling. Maybe having children someday. Their future had felt ordinary, and ordinary had once been enough. But the weeks that followed changed everything. Ariana sold her car. Then she emptied the small savings account they had built together. She started applying for every job she could find. Marketing. Administration. Customer service. Anything. Rejection emails arrived faster than interviews. Ethan became quieter. He started coming home later. His excuses were always reasonable, which somehow made them hurt more. Work is demanding. The market is unstable. I need to think about my own future. One evening, Ariana found him standing near the bedroom window with his phone in his hand. "Are you happy with me?" she asked. Ethan did not turn around immediately. "That's not a fair question. I didn't ask if it was fair." He finally looked at her. There was something in his eyes she had never seen before. Not hatred. Not anger. Distance. As though he had already begun leaving while his body was still standing in front of her. "Ariana," he said quietly, "I don't know if I can keep doing this." Her throat tightened. Doing what? He looked toward the apartment around them. Living like this. She glanced at the unpaid bills stacked beside the lamp. "This is temporary." Ethan gave a faint, humorless smile. "You don't know that." She wanted to argue. Instead, she whispered, "I thought we were supposed to face temporary things together." He looked away. That was the moment Ariana understood that the marriage had not broken when the money disappeared. It had broken when Ethan decided her struggle was no longer his. And she still had no idea that, before long, he would prove it by walking out the door. If you ever wonder how a marriage ends, sometimes it doesn't happen with a slammed door. Sometimes it ends quietly, one unanswered question at a time. Ariana Brooks had spent weeks trying to save something Ethan Caldwell had already decided to abandon. The night he finally left, the apartment was almost silent. Rain tapped against the bedroom window, soft and steady, while a single lamp cast a warm circle of light across the floor. 2 suitcases stood beside the front door. Ariana stared at them for several seconds before looking back at her husband. "So you really packed?" Ethan tightened his grip around the handle. "I need to go." She wanted to ask where. She already knew. She wanted to ask how long. She already understood. Instead, she looked at the man she had once trusted with every fragile part of her future. "Is there anything I can say?" Her voice barely rose above the rain. Ethan looked away. That small movement hurt more than an angry answer could have. Ariana stepped closer. She was 25 years old, exhausted from months of rejection, bills, and uncertainty, but there was still something steady in the way she stood. "Ethan, we said we would face difficult things together." He exhaled slowly. That was before everything became this. His eyes moved across the apartment. The unpaid envelopes on the kitchen counter. The empty space where her television had been before she sold it. The boxes she had not yet found the strength to unpack. Ariana followed his gaze. "This isn't forever. You don't know that. Neither do you." For a moment, neither spoke. The rain grew louder against the glass. Ethan finally reached into his pocket and placed his wedding ring on the small table beside the door. Ariana stared at it. The sound it made against the wood was almost nothing. Yet somehow it seemed louder than the suitcase wheels rolling across the floor. "I never wanted this for us," she whispered. Ethan looked at her then. His expression was tired, almost apologetic. "Neither did I." He opened the door. Cold hallway light spilled into the apartment. Ariana did not follow him. She simply stood there, watching him step across the threshold. "Ethan." He paused. She swallowed. For one last second, she wanted him to turn around and say he had changed his mind. She wanted him to remember every ordinary morning they had shared, every cheap dinner they had laughed over, every plan they had made when the future still felt safe. He looked back. But he did not return. "Take care of yourself, Ariana." Then the door closed. She remained still. The apartment suddenly felt enormous. She walked slowly toward the table and touched the ring with one finger. Her eyes filled, but the tears did not fall. She picked it up, carried it into the bedroom, and placed it inside a small wooden box where she kept old photographs and letters. Then she closed the lid. No shouting. No pleading. No dramatic goodbye. Just a quiet woman learning, in the loneliest room of her life, that she could not make someone stay. Outside, Ethan's footsteps disappeared down the hallway. Ariana sat on the edge of the bed and listened until she could hear nothing at all. Then she wiped her face, stood up, and walked back into the kitchen. There were bills on the counter. A nearly empty refrigerator. A laptop with another rejection email glowing on the screen. She looked at all of it for a long moment. And for the first time, she stopped asking who was going to save her. She opened the laptop. The screen lit her face in the darkness. Ariana took a breath, rolled up her sleeves, and began again. The first year after Ethan left did not feel like rebuilding. It felt like learning how to breathe without waiting for someone else to tell her that everything would be okay. Ariana moved into a small apartment on the other side of the city, a place with thin walls, one narrow window, and a kitchen barely large enough for a table and 2 chairs. It was nothing like the home she had once shared with Ethan. Yet on her first morning there, sunlight touched the floor without carrying the weight of an argument. The silence belonged to her. No footsteps coming home late. No unanswered questions. No suitcase waiting by the door. Ariana stood beside the window with a mug of coffee between both hands and watched the city wake slowly beneath a pale morning sky. She had very little money left. Her furniture consisted of a second-hand table, a mattress, and 2 boxes she had carried from the old apartment. But for the first time in months, she knew exactly what belonged to her. Herself. Beneath the bed sat another box she had almost forgotten. One rainy afternoon, while searching for an old tax document, she pulled it out and opened it. Inside were notebooks, printed business plans, conference badges, and pages covered with handwriting from years earlier. Ariana sat on the floor. She turned one page, then another. Before Ethan, before the marriage, before the bills and the fear, she had dreamed about building a consulting company. She had studied business systems, organizational strategy, and the quiet problems that made companies lose good people. She remembered how excited she had been when she first wrote the idea down. Then life happened. Ethan's career grew. Her responsibilities grew with it. Slowly, her own ambitions became something she would return to later. Ariana ran her fingers across one of the old pages. Later had finally arrived. The next morning, she found a small rented workspace above a bakery downtown. The office was barely bigger than her bedroom. The desk had scratches along one edge. The window faced a brick wall. But Ariana placed her laptop on the desk, opened a blank document, and began writing. She worked 12 hours that day. Some days became 14. She attended networking events where nobody knew her name. She introduced herself to executives who barely remembered the conversation. She sent proposals. She received silence. Then came the first client. A small regional company struggling with employee turnover agreed to let Ariana review its operations. The contract was modest. The payment would barely cover her expenses. Still, when the owner signed the agreement, Ariana stared at the page for several seconds. Someone had trusted her judgment. She walked home that evening carrying the signed contract against her chest. The city lights reflected in the wet pavement, and for once, she did not think about Ethan. Over the following months, one client became two. Two became four. Ariana learned to celebrate small victories, an invoice paid on time, a returning client, a recommendation from someone she had helped. There were difficult nights too. Nights when she sat alone at her kitchen table calculating expenses and wondering whether she had made a mistake. But each morning, she opened the laptop again. She was no longer rebuilding the life Ethan had left behind. She was building one he had never been part of. And slowly, almost quietly, the woman who had once sat beside an empty suitcase began becoming someone entirely new. Sometimes the opportunity that changes your life does not arrive looking like a miracle. Sometimes it arrives as a stranger who simply believes you are capable of more. By the end of Ariana Brooks's first year alone, the small office above the bakery had become too small for what she was building. She had learned how to read a struggling company from the inside, how to find the quiet problem everyone else ignored, and how to turn uncertainty into a plan people could actually follow. Her name still meant very little outside a small circle of clients. Ariana preferred it that way. She had no interest in appearing in magazines or standing beneath cameras. She wanted results. One rainy Thursday evening, she stayed late reviewing financial reports for a regional manufacturing company. The office was empty. The bakery downstairs had already closed, leaving only the faint smell of coffee and warm bread drifting through the floorboards. Ariana rubbed her tired eyes and turned another page. A shadow appeared beneath the office door. She looked up. A man stood there holding a folded umbrella. He was tall, quietly dressed, and older than her by several years. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know you're closed." Ariana glanced at the clock. "We are." He smiled faintly. "Then I'll be quick." His name was Daniel Reed. He had been referred by one of Ariana's earliest clients, a company she had helped rescue from a serious operational crisis. Daniel owned an investment firm that worked with businesses on the edge of expansion or collapse. He had read Ariana's report. Twice. "You didn't just fix their numbers," he said. You changed how they operate. Ariana closed the folder. Their people knew what was wrong. Nobody had asked them. Daniel studied her for a moment. That's exactly what interested me. He placed a business card on her desk. I want to discuss a partnership. Ariana did not touch the card immediately. She had learned something during the past year: opportunities were not always gifts. Sometimes they came with invisible strings. What kind of partnership? She asked. You remain in control of your company. I provide capital, access, and a larger network. Ariana looked down at the card. Why me? Daniel leaned back slightly. Because you built something useful without anyone giving you permission. The sentence stayed with her after he left. That night, Ariana walked home through the rain with his card inside her coat pocket. She thought about the woman she had been 5 years earlier. That woman had waited for Ethan to tell her everything would be okay. She had believed security came from having someone beside her. Now, standing beneath the streetlights with rain gathering on her shoulders, Ariana understood something different. Security could also come from knowing you could stand alone. She called Daniel the next morning. The partnership took months to finalize. There were negotiations, long meetings, lawyers, and numbers that made Ariana uncomfortable at first. She refused several terms before accepting the one that mattered most: she would remain the final decision-maker. Daniel agreed without hesitation. The investment changed everything. Ariana hired her first full-time employee. Then another. The tiny office became a real company. Contracts grew larger. Clients began referring to her as an expert. Still, Ariana kept the same scratched desk from the bakery office in her new workspace. One afternoon, Daniel noticed it. You could replace that. Ariana smiled. I know. She ran her hand along the worn edge. But I like remembering where I started. Daniel nodded. He understood. There was no need to ask what she had survived. Ariana had stopped measuring her life by what she had lost. She was finally measuring it by what she could build. And somewhere far from that little office, Ethan Caldwell had no idea that the woman he once believed was drowning was becoming the person other people would soon come to for a way out. The strangest thing about the past is that it can disappear for years, only to return wearing a name you never expected to see again. 5 years had passed since Ariana Brooks last heard Ethan Caldwell's voice. She had stopped checking old photographs. Stopped wondering where he lived. Stopped imagining what she would say if their paths ever crossed again. Ethan had become a closed chapter, sealed somewhere deep inside a life she no longer recognized. Then, one quiet Monday morning, his name appeared on her desk. Ariana was sitting in her new office overlooking downtown Chicago, reviewing quarterly reports while pale sunlight stretched across the glass wall behind her. The company had grown beyond anything she had imagined in that tiny office above the bakery. Her team now occupied 3 floors. Clients came from across the country. Investors who once would not return her calls now waited weeks for a meeting. Yet her morning routine had remained simple. Coffee. Reports. Silence. Her assistant, Maya, entered carrying a thin stack of applications. These are the final candidates for the operations position. Ariana nodded without looking up. Leave them here. Maya placed the files neatly across the desk. The last interview is Thursday. Ariana thanked her. After the door closed, she continued reading. One resume after another. Experienced managers. Former executives. People with impressive degrees and polished recommendations. She made notes beside each name, searching for competence rather than status. Then she reached the final application. Her fingers stopped. The room seemed to become quieter. At the top of the page was a familiar name. Ethan Caldwell. Ariana did not move for several seconds. His photograph was older. The confident expression she remembered had softened around the eyes. Beneath his name was a long list of experience, followed by a carefully written cover letter. He had worked in operations for several years. He had managed teams, improved efficiency, led major projects. On paper, he was qualified. Ariana leaned back in her chair. 5 years earlier, he had stood in their apartment with a suitcase beside him. Now he was asking to enter a company that existed because she had refused to stay broken. She could have closed the file immediately. She could have sent it to Human Resources with a single sentence. Do not interview him. Instead, she read the cover letter again. There was no mention of their marriage. No apology. No attempt to appeal to history. Just a professional application. That almost made it harder. Ariana walked to the window. Far below, traffic moved between buildings in slow streams of silver and black. She remembered the night he left. The ring on the table. The empty hallway. The words she had swallowed because she refused to beg someone to stay. She had spent years becoming the woman who no longer needed an explanation from him. Now, unexpectedly, an explanation had arrived at her desk. Her phone rang. Maya's voice came through the speaker. Ariana, there's one candidate I'm not sure about. Should we remove anyone before I schedule the final interviews? Ariana looked down at the application again. Her thumb rested lightly against Ethan's photograph. Her expression did not change. No, she said. Schedule everyone who meets the qualifications. Maya hesitated. Including Mr. Caldwell. Ariana looked once more toward the city beyond the glass. Especially him. She ended the call. Then she returned the application to the stack. Not on top. Not at the bottom. Exactly where every other candidate belonged. Because if Ethan Caldwell was going to walk into her life again, Ariana would not meet him as the woman he had abandoned. She would meet him as the woman she had become. There are moments when the past does not knock before entering. It simply opens the door and stands in front of you. Ariana Brooks sat behind the wide walnut desk, her hands resting calmly over the interview notes. Across from her, Ethan Caldwell remained standing for a second too long. The assistant had already left, closing the door behind him. Neither spoke. Outside the glass walls, Chicago moved beneath a pale afternoon sky. Cars crossed the streets below. Elevators carried people between floors. Somewhere nearby, a printer hummed. Ordinary sounds. An ordinary day. Except nothing about this moment was ordinary. Ethan finally lowered himself into the chair. His eyes stayed on Ariana. She looked different from the woman he remembered, but not because of expensive clothes or the office surrounding her. It was the stillness. 5 years earlier, she had stood in a small apartment trying to convince him that their marriage could survive a difficult season. Now she sat across from him without needing anything from him at all. Ariana opened the folder. Mr. Caldwell. His jaw tightened slightly at the formal address. Yes. Your experience is impressive. He nodded. Thank you. She turned the page. 7 years in operations. 3 years managing regional teams. 2 major restructuring projects. That's correct. Ariana looked at him for a moment. Why did you leave your previous position? Ethan paused. The company was acquired. And your role was eliminated? Eventually. She made a brief note. Her voice remained professional. Eventually. Ethan shifted in his chair. There were disagreements with the new leadership. Ariana looked down again. What kind of disagreements? He hesitated. Strategic ones. A faint silence settled between them. 5 years ago, Ariana would have filled silence with explanations. She would have tried to make the other person comfortable. Now she simply waited. Ethan looked at her hands. There was no wedding ring. He had expected that. What he had not expected was how much that small absence would affect him. You knew it was me, he said quietly. Ariana lifted her eyes. Yes. When you saw my application. Yes. And you still invited me. You met the qualifications. His expression changed. That's all. Ariana closed the folder halfway. What else should it be? Ethan looked away. He had rehearsed explanations during the drive downtown. He had imagined apologizing. He had imagined asking how she had become successful. He had imagined anger. What he had not prepared for was this calm professionalism. I didn't know this was your company, he admitted. Ariana leaned back slightly. I assumed you didn't. The words were not cruel. Somehow, that made them heavier. Ethan swallowed. Ariana, we're here to discuss the position. He stopped. She continued, if you want to talk about the past, this is not the place. Ethan looked toward the window. His reflection appeared faintly against the glass. For a moment, he seemed to see the younger version of himself standing beside that suitcase again. The man who had believed leaving was the same as protecting himself. I need this job, he said finally. Ariana studied his face. Why? He gave a quiet breath. Because I made mistakes. Her expression did not change. Everyone does. Not like mine. The room became still. Ariana closed the folder completely. Then tell me what you learned from them. Ethan looked at her. This time, he did not have an answer ready. And Ariana realized that the interview she had expected to be about his qualifications was becoming something else entirely. Not revenge. Not forgiveness. Just two people sitting across a desk, finally forced to look honestly at the choices that had brought them there. Some truths arrive too late to change what happened. But sometimes, they arrive just in time to change what happens next. Ethan sat quietly across from Ariana, his hands resting on his knees as the afternoon light stretched across the conference table. The city moved beyond the glass, distant and indifferent. Ariana waited. She had asked him what he had learned from his mistakes, and for several seconds, he seemed unable to find a version of the truth that did not make him uncomfortable. Finally, he looked down. I learned that I was afraid. Ariana said nothing. Ethan swallowed. When you lost your job, I told myself I was worried about our future. I told myself I was being realistic. His fingers tightened slightly. But that wasn't the truth. Ariana remained still. What was the truth? He looked at her. I was afraid of becoming poor with you. The words settled between them. No dramatic music. No raised voice. Just a sentence that had taken 5 years to say. Ariana looked toward the window. She remembered the apartment. The rain. The empty refrigerator. The night she had asked him to stay. She remembered believing that if he loved her enough, he would choose their marriage over his fear. Ethan continued quietly. I thought if I left early enough, I could protect myself. I thought losing you would hurt less than losing everything. Ariana finally looked back at him. Did it? He shook his head. No, his answer came immediately this time. It didn't. He took a breath. I spent years pretending I had made the right decision. I worked harder. I earned more. I moved from one company to another. From the outside, everything looked fine. His eyes dropped to the folder on the table. But every time something went wrong, I remembered what I had done. Ariana did not interrupt. She had imagined this conversation many times after he left. In those imagined versions, she had demanded an apology. She had asked why she had not been enough. She had wanted him to understand the nights she spent counting every dollar. But now that the apology was sitting in front of her, she realized she no longer needed it to heal. "Why did you apply here?" she asked. Ethan looked at her honestly. "Because I need work." A faint sadness crossed his expression. "But that's not the whole reason." He hesitated. "When I saw your company, I thought it was simply another opportunity. I didn't know it was yours." Ariana nodded. "And if you had known?" Ethan was silent. "I probably wouldn't have applied." "Why?" "Because I knew I had no right to ask you for anything." Ariana studied him. There was no anger in his face now. Only embarrassment and something quieter. Regret. She closed the folder. "Ethan, I can't give you this position because I feel sorry for you. I understand. And I won't reject you because you hurt me." He looked up. "Then what happens now?" Ariana stood and walked toward the window. She looked down at the streets where thousands of people were moving through lives she knew nothing about. 5 years ago, she had believed closure meant hearing the right words from Ethan. Now she understood something different. Closure was deciding what his words were worth. She turned back. "You're not ready to work here." Ethan lowered his eyes. The sentence was gentle, but final. Then Ariana placed a second envelope on the table. "But I know a company that is hiring someone with your experience. The position comes with a probation period and a smaller salary." Ethan stared at the envelope. "Why would you do that?" Ariana gave him a quiet smile. "Because you asked for a chance." He looked at her for a long moment. "You don't hate me?" Ariana shook her head. "I stopped carrying that years ago." Ethan's eyes became glassy. He nodded once. She walked toward the door and opened it for him. This time, Ethan did not leave because he had chosen someone else. He left because Ariana had chosen herself. The day Ethan Caldwell walked out, Ariana thought losing him was the hardest thing she would ever survive. She did not yet know that one day, she would watch him walk away again, and feel nothing but peace. The office had grown quiet after the interview. Ethan stood near the door with the envelope Ariana had given him, his fingers resting carefully against its edge. He looked at her as though he wanted to say something more, but neither of them seemed to need another explanation. 5 years ago, silence between them had meant pain. Now it meant closure. "Thank you," Ethan said at last. Ariana nodded. "I hope the new position works out for you." He gave a faint smile. "I hope so too." He hesitated. "Ariana?" She looked up. "Yes." His eyes lowered for a moment. "You really changed." Ariana considered the words. She could have told him about the nights she worked until 2 in the morning. The rejection letters. The first client. The tiny office above the bakery. The fear of failing again. The years she spent learning how to trust her own decisions. But she did not need to explain any of it. "I had to," she said simply. Ethan nodded. His hand moved toward the door. Then he stopped. "I used to think you needed me to build a future." Ariana looked at him quietly. "I used to think so too." That answer stayed with him. He opened the door and stepped into the hallway. This time, Ariana did not watch him with sadness. She watched him with the calm recognition reserved for someone who had once been important, but no longer held the power to disturb her peace. Ethan walked toward the elevators. The same polished floors stretched beneath his shoes, the same city lights glowed beyond the windows, but something had changed. He was no longer leaving a marriage. He was leaving a woman who had already built a life without him. When the elevator doors closed around him, Ariana returned to her desk. Her assistant, Maya, appeared a few minutes later. "How did the interview go?" Ariana glanced at the empty chair across from her. "It went fine." Maya studied her face. "Are you okay?" Ariana smiled softly. "I'm better than okay." She turned toward the window. Evening had settled over Chicago, covering the buildings in blue shadows and scattered gold lights. On the desk beside her laptop sat the old scratched wooden box she had carried from the apartment above the bakery. She opened it one final time. Inside was the wedding ring Ethan had left behind. Ariana held it in her palm for a few seconds. Not with anger. Not with longing. Just memory. Then she closed the box and placed it inside a drawer. She did not throw the ring away. She simply stopped giving it a place where it could shape her future. Outside, the city continued moving. Somewhere below, people hurried toward dinners, meetings, apartments, and lives waiting for them. Ariana picked up her coffee and returned to the report on her screen. There were new clients to meet. New plans to approve. A company to grow. A future that had nothing to do with the man who once believed her worst moment defined her. She had not humiliated Ethan. She had not made him suffer. She had not demanded that he regret leaving. She had simply refused to remain the woman he left behind. And perhaps that was the quietest victory of all. Because some people return hoping to find the person they abandoned. What they discover instead is someone who no longer needs to be found. Ariana looked once more at the city beyond the glass, then turned off the office light. She walked into the hallway alone, calm and certain, while the golden reflections followed her across the polished floor. She had lost a husband. She had lost a home. She had lost the future she once imagined. But somewhere along the way, she had found something far more valuable. Herself. She didn't win him back. She won herself.